Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Founders Grid, sponsored by Gaper.io. Today we have George. George is the Chief of Staff at BRIO and Mentor Collective. George, welcome to the show.
So glad to be here. Thanks so much, Mustafa.
So, tell us a bit about yourself, before Mentor Collective, what you've been doing. Tell us everything, old girlfriends, new girlfriends, what is it all about?
Yeah, certainly. So I guess professionally, I'm an ex-Bain consultant turned product owner, and I specialize in helping startups move, from a services orientation to being a tech-enabled product, or going from a tech-enabled product to being a pure SaaS business. Outside of that, in my personal life, very passionate about mental, emotional, and physical wellness. I'm also a massive nerd. Um, I run a Dungeons and Dragons campaign on the weekend for my friends during this pandemic. And I've also spent a lot of my youth doing live action role playing. So I'm kind of all over the place.
Nice. Interesting. So, a bit more with your role at Mentor Collective,
Sure.
almost 6 years now. So,
Yeah. So absolutely. Yeah. So I joined Mentor Collective as the first employee, and joined at a stage when we were defining product market fit. We had just been accepted into Techstars, and at that point, I was owning all of the relationships with our customers, which at that point were high schools and universities. And then over the next 5 years, we kept growing the team. Ultimately, right now, the team is at about 50 full-time employees. And through that, I helped build out multiple functions across support, account management, and sort of internal operations, things like HR. And also during that experience about 2 years ago, helped make the decision where we ultimately decided to become a remote first company.
got it. And how's the experience been so far of being a remote person? So, is it like a hybrid version or a total remote version, or how was the transition like?
Yeah, so we always had 1 to 2 remote team members, typically in a sales team, for example. But the majority before we made the transition, about 90%, were in the HQ up in Boston. And what happened when we were about 20, 25 people, we were just closing some additional funding and deciding where were we going to build our engineering team. And so that raised a lot of questions about, do we build a local team in Boston where it's very hard to recruit, it's very expensive, and especially in our tech stack, there's a lot of competition for those engineers. Versus, should we consider, supporting team members that weren't based in Boston, or even looking at other options such as working with, someone who could help place teams for us. And ultimately, an outcome of that conversation was that we realized what was required to have a high functioning company that was remote friendly was that you had really good communication practices. There was a lot of accountability and great documentation, but for things that we cared about already. So sort of like a byproduct of this work on where were you going to build the engineering team led to a broader conversation of, maybe actually this is a thing that we should support for everyone at the company. And so for us, it ended up being a pretty smooth transition.
So, unfortunate times because of COVID, it has affected a lot of businesses while it has been a catalyst for others, Zoom being one prime example, right?
Yeah.
So, how has the business affected Mentor Collective? And yeah, let's hear that and then
Yeah.
continue the second part.
Sure. Yeah, I think there's two areas that are very interesting to go into. One is kind of how's it affected the team, and the other is how's it affected our prospect as a business and universities in general. So I think for your audience, I'll start with the team. That might be most helpful, and then if still useful, I can talk about the market. We were pretty lucky in that we already had a lot of the infrastructure set up to support no one being in the office. As soon as states started mandating stay-at-home orders, we had already said no one is allowed in the office, which for a lot of people was no big change because we had people in multiple states all over the country. How does accountability work? How do you do goal setting? That was a pretty smooth transition for us. One of the interesting things that we saw when we started surveying the team about how they were feeling was that overall folks felt significantly more productive and slightly less connected. There's about a 2-to-1 magnitude difference. So with that, we started investing in doing more culture events. For example, we gave everyone a budget to watch a family movie and then share that experience. That's in a Slack channel at BRIO. So this is not with Venture Collective, but another tactical example you could think about is we subscribed to this company called Mystery Chocolate Box, where they would ship you chocolate bars that you didn't know the ingredients of. And then as a culture event, we'd all get together and taste the chocolate together and try and figure out what was in them. And I'd highly recommend that for like anywhere from a 5 to 15 person team. So maybe more department level.
Nice. Interesting. Last question, since at Mentor Collective, as a company, you've worked with multiple young individuals, so any 3 pieces of advice you'd like to give these young founders who are looking to start out and don't know where to start, especially in times like COVID, 3 pieces of advice.
3 pieces of advice?
Tough one, huh?
Yeah, too many things to say without knowing what they're focused on.
Yeah.
I think the first thing for me is, and this might require a bit of a personal anecdote, but work really hard to not build something cool that no one's going to want to buy. It's better to make sure that someone is going to buy the thing that you're building. I see a lot of companies these days that invest very heavily in building something really sexy that seems very cool in their head, and then when they turn around to share it with the market, everyone says that it's really cool, but no one actually wants to pay them any money to build it. I think the next piece of advice is when you're building a business, think a lot about the most basic building blocks of that company, especially in the remote world. Being able to very clearly articulate what the different jobs and responsibilities are that allow your business to grow and function is very important. At early stages, every single person is going to be in like 2 to 5 of those jobs. Each of those jobs are not going to be a full-time employee, but having clearly articulated the functions and subcomponents of those functions will make it a much smoother process when it becomes time to start hiring people and growing as a business. And then as a third thing, this is more on a personal side, but before the pandemic, I didn't really live in the same place for more than 3 or 4 months at a time. And so I didn't have a lease. And the way that I would manage this is through Airbnb. And one of the things that I highly recommend doing is if you have the freedom to be living and traveling in that way, what you can do is you can go to 10 or 15 hosts and reach out and say that you're looking for a long-term rental, but that maybe their price range is too high because they're typically budgeting based on like a 1 day or 1 week stay. And often by starting that conversation, you can get discounts as much as 30 to 50%. Because from their end, it's very desirable to have one person staying with them for a long period where they don't have to keep cleaning the house and changing out guests.
Interesting. George, thank you so much for being on the show. And it was lovely chatting with you, but my marketing team tells me I need to keep it within 10 minutes. So thank you so much for being on the show and stay safe. Thank you.
Likewise, Mustafa. Take care.